We won't go for very long. I just thought it would be useful since you all were kind enough to take the initial survey to give you kind of an insider briefing on some of the results from the survey and from the project that we had on content services. And so I'll go through this just as a reminder. You should have, we sent it today earlier than we released to the general public. You should have a copy of the report. If you don't, then just ping us back and we'll make sure that you get one. I should also say that we're in the process of just about ready to go with a new one on digital workplace. So if you could keep an eye out for that in the next week, we'd really appreciate your engagement on that topic as well. So let me hop in and give you just a sense of what I see as the totals and the highlights. And again, this is just this is covering the major things. There's a lot more detail in the report itself, but I wanted to just give you my sense and then also give people the opportunity, if they have any questions, to ask. So let's hop right in. So first of all, I think the one thing that I wanted to make sure that everybody understands is that this is part of a program. We do 8 publications in our Industry Watch series over the course of the year. 3 of those occur in what we call our State of the Industry series, and that focuses on content services, process services, and analytics services, what AIIM considers to be the 3 primary building blocks of an intelligent information management strategy. And then 5 focus on key issues. And so we're in the process right now, I'm actually in the process of finalizing the writing of the second one there, building an effective strategy for migration and integration. That'll be released most likely next Thursday. And so keep an eye out for that. And then coming up, like I say, we have one on the digital workplace, another one on intelligent capture come June. In September, we'll be talking about RPA and integrating content into an intelligent automation strategy. And then in later in the year, we'll be talking about Office 365, always one of our more popular items. So again, thank you for participating in the Content Services State of the Industry survey. I hope that you'll participate in all the rest of them because everybody benefits from the sharing of information and hopefully being able to access the results directly instead of having to be part of a marketing queue, if you will, is valuable to you, and you'll continue to participate in the survey. So thank you. So let me hop right in. And there were kind of 4 things that I wanted to accomplish with this particular project. And the first one was to really better, in a more systematic fashion, understand the connection between digital transformation and intelligent information management, and then hop from there to focus specifically on content services and what the community is trying to tell us about content services moving forward. So the first thing, and this is similar to a data point that we've had in the past, is we do ping people in terms of identifying how important digital transformation is to their organization. And as you can see here, there is a clear connection between organizational goals and objectives and digital transformation. 79% say it's either important or very important to them. I think one of the challenges is that, and I hope to probe this in some future surveys, is exactly how people define digital transformation and how they view the role of information management connected to that. There's a lot of variation there, and that's one of the issues that we explored in this survey. But 79% say digital transformation is very important. We go from there to, we explored a bit the question of, how is digital transformation more than just a technology strategy? And I found the Deloitte digital maturity model, if you do a Google on that, you can find it, to be really interesting in that regard. And so we asked the survey participants to basically give us a reality check in terms of where they were in their organization relative to the different elements of the Deloitte digital maturity model. And the results, I think, manifested for me one of the points that I've always tried to make is that, this is not just a technology question. This is a business strategy question, a customer question, and most importantly, it's an organization and culture question. And so organizations can talk about digital transformation until they're blue in the face, but if there's not an organizational infrastructure and a cultural framework that allows organizations to make transformational changes, it's pretty hard to just stick technology on top of that and hope that it works. Third question that we focused in here was, where are people focusing these efforts? And as you can see here, there's three that kind of pop up, if you will. And they're actually pretty interesting ones when you start to think about what digital transformation means for organizations. And so at the top is IT processes. And I like to think of this as basically similar to the desire of organizations to modernize their information infrastructure. What they're looking for is business agility. And they're looking for greater agility in their IT processes to support those business objectives. And so that is the place where people start looking at transformation. This question of governance, clearly the old ways of looking at governance aren't working. And then thirdly, and I think this becomes important as organizations try to think about how they get funding for projects, is that understanding how how you can transform customer experiences and customer service becomes something I think that's very important in terms of selling projects. So this piece, we asked folks, these are all of the IIM building blocks down the left-hand side of this slide. Some of you that know other AIM publications probably recognize this. And so we asked everybody in the survey to identify their stage of maturity relative to each one of these. And this is probably an example where there's kind of no real surprises, but it does reinforce, I think, some of the challenges that organizations have, which is that what I would consider to be some of the more traditional kinds of intelligent information management technologies, things like records management, document management, some questions related to content migration, business process management. Those are clearly places in which organizations are more mature than some of the newer kinds of focus areas within IIM, things like RPA and things like multi-channel capture and metadata management. And so, organizations have a challenge there in terms of sustaining their existing investments relative to the more mature technologies, while simultaneously freeing up resources to go after some of the ways to better leverage some of those existing investments. So here I focus a little bit on some of the critical information management problems that users are trying to solve with content services. So what are they trying to do? What are their objectives? What are some of the business problems that are at the top of their list? And so this was, I thought, an interesting data point for me, which is when Gartner talks about content services, they basically identify 5 major use cases. And you can see them down the left-hand side of the slide. And they focus on team productivity, on records management, on document management, on business process applications, and on back office processing. And so the takeaway here, I think, and it goes back to that previous slide in which we looked at the overall maturity of organizations relative to the core technologies within IIM, is that there is a lean forward, if you will, in terms of what people are trying to do with content services that gets beyond the traditional way that they've looked at these technologies. And so what organizations are clearly trying to accomplish is they're trying to improve the effectiveness of their knowledge workers and give them better tools in order to collaborate and work together. And they're trying to figure out how they get better tools to allow those knowledge workers to view content in the context of business process application. The point of this slide was to make the case that what's going on within organizations is an effort to focus their content services investments around both team productivity and knowledge worker productivity, and to better connect their business processes to content. And that's reflected in other data points that we've had in other surveys, where we ask people about, do they want to consume content in more modular fashion? Do they want to integrate it better with business processes? Are they tired of swivel screen knowledge workers who are forced to be human systems integrators? And so I think this is an interesting data point because it implies a forward lean to where people are trying to go with their content services investments. And this data point I thought was really interesting, which is that I asked people in the survey to self-assess where they were with regards to business performance, overall business performance. And this data point, I broke the data then by leaders and laggards. And very interesting to me when you start to think about this, because what it says is that you've got folks that on the leading side that are really trying to leverage this team productivity side, while the folks that are laggards are more caught up in the meat and potatoes, records management and document management functionality, and are still trying to get beyond that. So this question, which is we were trying to identify what are the problems that people still have with content? And so, at the same time that I say people have a forward lean to where they're trying to go, there's still an awful lot of problems that are out there that are still pretty basic to people that they haven't been able to conquer so far. And so what you have here are things like classifying and applying metadata, getting widespread user adoption. You kind of go down those gray columns there in terms of things that are a problem or a significant problem. And clearly there are still a lot of unresolved issues within the user community when it comes to fully optimizing their content within an overall information management strategy. So this question, is this a problem? This is the percentage point difference between laggards and leaders. And so, in other words, the way to interpret this chart is that when you look at those kinds of problems on the left-hand side, how much more of a problem is this for the laggards than the leaders? And what you can see is that there's a huge tail of problems out there that are even more pronounced for laggard organizations. They're a problem for everybody. You can see it on the preceding slide, but they're particularly a problem for lagging organizations. So when you talk about what are the kinds of capabilities people are looking for in their content services solutions, what's on their wish list, and it really dovetails back to some of those business challenges that were mentioned within the Gartner content services report. So at the top of the list, things like content integration into core business processes, very key to organizations in terms of prioritizing their investments. Secondly, they're looking for more flexible deployment models. Thirdly, they're looking for built-in records management rather than records management that has to be bolted on. And they're looking to automate the categorization and classification process. And so what you have there again is an effort on the part of organizations to view these content capabilities in a much less monolithic way than they traditionally have, in a way that allows them to be much more flexible and dynamic and automate a lot of the processes that are currently manual in their organizations. So, second major, if you will, bundle of content services questions I wanted to look at in this survey was this question of how automation is revolutionizing how people think about records management and information governance. And so, a couple data points I wanted to share there. This first one reflects the fact of, this is a key area for organizations when it comes to thinking about information governance in terms of being able to automate the information that's tied to core business processes. And so you hear 53% basically say it would either be a deal changer or highly important if they could do this. And so that struggle for automation, I think, is something that organizations continue to try to wrestle with. We asked this question about how automated are some of those processes with regards to governance. And these are just some sample things that I tested along the left side of this chart. Some of the things that are, kind of typically the fodder of automation initiatives when it comes to governance. And what you can see here is that when you ask the question, how automated are these processes? And you look at that gray bar, you look at the yellow bar, and then that blue bar, the dark blue bar. What you see is a high degree of manual processes that still exist. Despite all the conversations about automating this, it's still a relatively emerging area for most organizations. We asked this kind of question, which I found really a number of interesting things for people in this community to think about, for information professionals to think about. These agree-disagree questions, and most notably this one that's second down there, I find really, really interesting to think about, which is this notion of how do you sell these capabilities in your organization? And so we asked that agree-disagree question. Information and governance is better sold indirectly as a byproduct of automation, and or is it better sold direct, head-on? You know, we in this community have a tendency to deal with it in a head-on kind of way. And what the data implies is that there may be a more oblique way of thinking about this, that in order to sell these capabilities, you have to sell them packaged up into some core business objectives that people care about that go beyond the end objective of information governance. So the main message there, I think, is that there's some data that seems to suggest that information governance is a means to an end and not necessarily the end that the business ultimately cares about. So spending patterns, and let's think a little bit about this in terms of how spending patterns for content services are changing and evolving. And so we asked this question, and as a reminder, the core building blocks of content services in our AIIM model are records management preservation, document management, content migration, integration and collaboration, and multi-channel capture. And so what you can see here is that when you start looking at spending patterns, when we ask people what their budget was last year for each of these kinds of content services building block, and the survey that we usually do goes to both AIM and non-AIM people. And by AIM people, I don't mean AIM members, but I mean the AIM community writ large. And then I also use about half the sample from people that are totally unconnected with AIM. This part, I focused exclusively on the AIM side, kind of figuring that those are the people that are really going to know the details about budget kinds of decisions. And so what you see here is a couple things. One is you see the relative maturity of some of the technologies that we talked about earlier, and the relatively high degree of investment that people have in records management and core document management capabilities. You can also see that multi-channel capture, you might recall that that was one of the more immature technologies in terms of overall patterns of deployment. It's reflected in this chart. A lot of organizations haven't quite gotten there yet. And what we mean by multi-channel capture, for folks that don't know it, is you know, this idea of you have multiple input streams coming into an organization. You know, some coming from the web, some coming from email, some coming from forms, you know, all sorts of things coming in from all over the place. And you've got to rationalize that into a single digital stream if you want to have an effective strategy to manage it. And so that's still an emerging area, and you want to do that in an automated fashion as well. So this last couple slides here with regards to spending patterns, I think is some of the more interesting things to me, because we asked people in the survey to identify, you know, there are three core elements of IIM: content services, process services, and analytics services. And we asked them to identify what is the most important one to your organization. And so what you see here is that that blue bar is what people said now. Then a little later on in the survey, I asked them to identify what they thought it would be 2 years from now, hopefully to get them kind of a little bit of difference between their perspectives. And what you see here is, again, what I would call a forward lean to how people are viewing content services. And I think the implication is that traditional content management capabilities are increasingly becoming commoditized. They're increasingly becoming table stakes rather than a source of competitive advantage. And so the larger game that many organizations, I think, are focused in on is process automation and machine learning. And you see that in that kind of migration from the blue lines to the blue bars to the to the orange ones in terms of how people expect this to change in the next couple of years. It's really particularly interesting to me when I looked at the data from the perspective of company size. And so here's where you really see some interesting things, I think, in terms of relative degree of past investment in content management capabilities and the desire of organizations to better leverage those existing content management capabilities. So again, you start to look at this and say, okay, where were people now? Where do they think they're going to be in 2 years? And what's the difference between those two? And break it out by size. And so you look at this and sort of the items on the right-hand side of this slide in gray and in orange, that's the forward lean, if you will. And I think particularly when it comes to some of the suppliers that are purely content management suppliers, is that, you know, that top bar up there, over 1,000 employees, you know, 20 percentage point decline in terms of the relative importance of content services. That says to me again that we're in the business of commoditizing a lot of those capabilities, that people are looking beyond their first and second generation implementations to take them to the next level, and they're spending money in order to try to do that. So last thing that I wanted to highlight is that I spent a little bit of time. I asked this kind of crazy question on the survey where, you know, if the genie, you know, Aladdin's genie gave you 3 wishes to improve your content management solutions, what would they be? And so I kind of went through and did word clouds and did all sorts of things to try to think about, you know, what were some of the trends, and picked out these 10 representative responses, if you will, that I think say a lot about the state of the content services space and where it's going. So here's what they came up with. You know, so first of all, this was from a small nonprofit organization, is that clearly usability and clearly ease of implementation that approximates what people can get in a consumer environment is important to organizations. I would say it's important to organizations of all size, but particularly for small and medium-sized organizations. Secondly, there's this desire for records management to be something that just happens, you know, that is not a bolt-on, you know, that is not something that people have to think about. I was talking to a company at the AIIM conference last week, you know, big company that is trying to get to the point of having all of that stuff invisible to end users. And that's a huge challenge when you think about it, and very, very different from how we traditionally have approached this. Make it easier. Make everything easier. This is part of a longer quote from this person that was talking about, you know, make OCR easier, make RPA easier, make integration easier. That at the heart, I think, is what content services is ultimately all about. And again, the easier theme, different person, but this line of business integration. We've done some survey work in the past in which we ask people about how integrated are their content capabilities with their core line of business systems. And there's a gap in many organizations in which they're not fully leveraging their content capabilities in the context of their core business processes and business systems. And that's been a hard thing, given that a lot of content management deployments have been done on a single process basis. When you try to extend that into multiple processes, people have challenges. And it's reflected, I think, in this comment. People want to, this gets to the multi-channel capture point, is that capture has shifted from this thing that is done after after information enters an organization to something that occurs much, much earlier in the process, at the point of origination and entry. And people want to do that in as automated a fashion as they possibly can. I think recognizing the fact that there's a tide of information chaos that's rising, and that exploding volume of information is keeping them from fully optimizing what they have. Out of support, box support for hybrid systems. This is a good one because most organizations, you know, it's lots of times we like to say, you know, there's this sort of either or world between on-prem and hybrid. And the reality is that there's no either or. It's just enormous shades of gray in most organizations, you know, where you have some stuff in the cloud, some stuff in the public cloud, some stuff in the on-prem systems, you know, some stuff that's in departmental systems rather than organizational systems. And so that need for governance infrastructures that sit atop all that and allow people to manage that hybridness, if you will, is increasingly important to folks moving forward. This, I think, was kind of an interesting data point from somebody, interesting comment, my friend Thornton May would refer to this as like management preoccupation with the latest bright, shiny object. And so what this person, I think, was trying to say is that there's a real need in their organization for a management vision of where they're trying to go, what the horizon looks like, so that they don't just chase every new innovation that comes down the line. Again, this point about automating the information as it comes into the organization, you know, magically categorized, you know, managed with the necessary levels of security that are appropriate to the degree of risk associated with the particular asset. Increasingly important, make things easier to use, easier to implement, you know, and then kind of the last thing, and there's always one when you ask a question like this, and there was actually more than one on our survey group, because I think they're probably a pretty smart bunch, is they said they wanted 3 more wishes, of course, along the way. So the net, as you kind of think about this moving forward, and as George mentioned in the chat, happy to, you know, have folks either pose questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and just ask a question, happy to do that as well. What we're trying to do with this is give you a sense of the overall results. And again, thank you very much for participating in the survey. And I think the point that I take away from all this is that organizations are trying to digitally transform. They realize that there's a rising tide of information coming into their organizations that's making that more and more difficult. As they look to that, they are realizing that they need to modernize their information infrastructures in order to address that. The business as usual is no longer sufficient. When they think about that, it changes the way they look at content management capabilities from being much more linear and monolithic to being more dynamic and modular. And that drives people in the direction of trying to think about a different set of strategies for optimizing content capabilities that's more tied to team productivity and more tied to integration in a seamless way into core business applications. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. As I mentioned at the start, there's both an infographic and the overall report. Please feel free to, you know, share that with your colleagues, you know, and again, thank you for participating in the survey. We'll try to do this kind of a commentary for folks that are kind enough to share their information with us on future surveys. And we'll be having one coming up just in the next week or two on digital workplace, which I really think will be an interesting topic to explore with folks. So let me just pause and see if there's any questions, either in the chat or directly. And you can unmute yourself and just yell them out if you want. And if not, then in a little bit, we'll just adjourn. And again, my apologies for the wacky internet situation here. All right, we'll give it one of those going once, going twice. Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you for attending and thank you for participating in this survey. And please feel free to contact me directly at johnmancini@aim.org. If you have any questions about the data or, you know, any circumstances in which you'd like different data points explained, you know, what I think it means and stuff, because we just covered the surface here and there's a lot more in there than what we covered today. So again, thank you so much. Let us know if this was useful too. That would be very helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.